Welcome to the Project Management Happy Hour. Our aim is to share frank and honest discussion about real-world issues in project management, but do it in a way that's not too dry, though it might get a bit salty sometimes. How smart teams talk themselves into project failure with Dr. Bill Brantley.
I'm so excited for our audience to hear this episode today. I went into this blind, kind of, and I really like what we talked about. I was surprised how much we talked about it. I mean, project failure is one of your favorite topics, Kim.
It is, and for the record, I wanted to name this episode The O-Ring Problem in Your PMO with Dr. Bill Brantley.
Oh, God. It's so dad joke forward. How dare you?
I know. It's awful.
Yeah. I'm excited for our listeners to hear about normalization of deviance. And we go into it in depth in this episode. But, one of the things I kept thinking about as we talked about this is how this isn't just something that happens in projects. It can be a tactic that's used by anybody in your life and any organization that you might be near or around. So I just kept thinking about how little things can deviate and then they become the new normal over and over again. And so I thought this was fascinating to talk through, especially with the way that things are right now in the world.
It really is. It's that inching forward to the precipice. It's the boiling of the frog analogy. It's all that. It's just one step, make it normal, make it worse, make it normal. And it eventually you're going to find the end there.
Yeah. So I'm excited today to introduce you to Dr. Bill Brantley. He is President and Chief Learning Officer of the Brantley Advanced Social Sciences Application, BAS 2A, which helps organizations with strategic workforce development. He holds multiple certifications in project management, business analysis, and talent development. As an adjunct faculty member at the University of Louisville for 25 years and the University of Maryland for 14 years, he has taught various courses in communication, project management, and public administration. He developed 20 online courses in project management communication, digital transformation, vibe coding, environmental project management, and talent develop management, reaching over 200,000 students globally.
Bill is the author of The Persuasive Project Manager, 4 Scenarios for Future of Federal Government, Strategic Career Reinvention, and The Zen of Machiavelli. Bill was a federal government employee at various agencies between 2008 and 2023 before launching his own consultancy. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hey, thank you so much. Great to be here.
After talking so long, it's fun to finally have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, I am excited to learn very much today because I don't think I've gotten to spend a lot of time with Bill. So Kim is the longtime knower of Bill here in comparison to me. But we are going to be talking about one of your favorite topics today, Kim, failure, project failure.
I love it when it's not my project.
It's true. Yeah, you're like project failure schadenfreude is your favorite thing.
It is. But before we dive in, Bill, I've got a question. You've probably heard me ask this. I love to ask this of all of our guests, and it's this. What is the most valuable business lesson that you had to learn the hard way?
Okay, so I love to give this example, and this is back early on in my career when I was in the federal government as a presidential management fellow. It's a 2-year program and gets you kind of ready for management. And, wonderful experience in my life. With PMFs, and I know some of my fellow PMFs may not like this, but we kind of come into government, we're a little arrogant because we're young, we're going to be in there, we're going to change things and all that. And I really had a great experience. I had a great mentor, and he really taught me a hard lesson about emotional intelligence because I came in and I was ready to change things. And I was an arrogant little jerk, and I was an arrogant little jerk to a lot of folks. And at one meeting I walked into, this person just started crying. And okay. So Frank pulled me aside and he said, "You see that? Okay, I don't care how well you are at doing things and getting stuff done. You're good at that, but you're not going to get very far if people don't like you." Okay. So, and this is kind of interesting. It came out at the same time the book, Goldman's book on emotional intelligence came out. So he said, go to Borders, when we had a Borders back in DC, and buy the book and read it. So I learned a hard lesson from that, read it, and actually I've kind of made it. I actually do emotional intelligence coaching. And I'll admit sometimes I backslide because I usually, I'm all about the mission, get the mission done. And sometimes I've been in meetings where I've been a little sarcastic, a little mean, and I don't need to be. So yeah, that's when I learned the hard way.
I share that lesson that I learned the hard way. I was like, well, work is where we do things and get things done. I don't know why we have to have feelings. They told me I didn't have to have feelings at work. So I don't know why everybody is so upset at everything. At the same time, I could have been the person that cried in the meeting that you walked into. I'd be like, we don't have to have feelings. And I was also crying. I've been both sides of this story. Like, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Now, speaking of unsuccessful conversations, wow, this is an awkward transition.
Speaking of crying on projects.
Speaking of crying on projects. Now, you, Bill, have done some work around looking at project failure in big government projects, which is really interesting. And so can you tell us a bit about your framework and what kind of work have you done in this space?
Well, I was getting my PhD from Walden University, and I was doing, a dissertation, and I was in government at the time. Then I came out to work on the Walden PhD, and I was in government, I'd say, as a PMF for about 3-4 years, and looking at all kinds of different projects and working on projects, and really taught me that no matter how well you plan sometimes or how well you try to execute, there's going to be a project failure. And I wanted to really dig into that. And actually, I had a discussion with my advisor about this because I said, I felt like, this is, I don't know if this is not really a good place to start. I didn't really have data, but I felt like there was a common theme to how projects fail in the government. Okay. And he said, no, I don't think so. I think it's all different. I think there's all kinds of different things. So that was kind of like, a little bit of a friendly bet there. And what I did, and I told him, well, I'm going to study this because we have to do this. It's like an oral, when we do oral exams, but I had to do a paper called Knowledge Area Module, and it's like 200, 300 pages. And I said, well, I'm going to just investigate that. I'm going to look at look at big project management failures in the government, in the federal government especially. And then I remember my advisor, and this was like a running joke with a bunch of them. Well, I bet you'll find lots of cases. Okay. Yeah. So, government project management, as you know, Kim, is not as, even in the private sector, seems to have better success rates at that time. So I looked at some major failures. So, of course, there was Columbia and Challenger.
Right.
I then looked at something, I'm trying to remember, I think it was an A2 Avenger. It was a carrier-based stealth bomber the Navy was trying to build. And that was back during the late 80s. Cheney was Secretary of Defense at the time. And then there was one, and I can't remember the exact name, was in California Economic Development Association, where they were trying to build this economic development opportunity for folks. And they spent around $30 million in late 1960s dollars, and they trained 12 people. It was an amazing disaster and implementation. So I started looking at all these projects, and I started, of course, figuring out what was common to these projects. Okay. And one thing I found with it, this is also the year I remember when I was in a book club at General Service Administration. They just published Into Thin Air.
Right.
Which is about the Everest expedition, people climbing Everest, and
I read
really
that one. Yeah.
What happened. Oh yeah, really, crazy, sad stuff. But I remember reading an article about the idea of dangerous goal pursuit. Like, these folks, we're going to do whatever we need to do to get to the summit, and they forget all caution to the wind, and they basically, you have experienced people dying on the summit because they just didn't pay attention to the signals. So I kind of brought that in. I know we were talking about this, and one thing that it was great. There's a good book by Diane Vaughan. She's a sociologist, called The Challenger Launch Decision. And it introduced the concept of normalization of deviance. And the best way to describe it is, with the Challenger, it was the O-rings. Remember those O-rings that were like the seals on the solid rocket boosters, and there was a burn through and the solid rocket booster separated in mid-flight, which is not supposed to do, and caused, the Challenger explosion. And what they were finding out is that this was happening even since the first flight of the shuttle with the O-rings. where the O-rings were kind of, distorted. They weren't working right the way they should. Morton Thiokol, the engineers there, were just, looking at the O-rings and measuring how much of a burn through it was going through. And you had a lot of near misses, a lot of really close near misses in this. And with the normalization of deviance, what Dr. Vaughan found was that, we survived that near miss. It's okay. Next time we'll be okay. And you started seeing where they started accepting more and more burn through and even further burn through. So she has this whole way that this thing happens. You have an anomaly appear, so like the O-ring, or with the Columbia, we had the foam strikes, where the insulation would knock on the foam and start making holes in them. And the rationalization was, well, we happened before, we survived, it should be okay. Then you get a precedent. Okay, well, we're going to have foam strikes. We're going to have O-ring burn through. It's okay. And then you get, okay, we got to launch this thing. So if you remember the Challenger, it was the first teacher in space. They were going to have a big press conference with Ronald Reagan. They wanted to, push education and all that. So there was a lot of pressure to launch the shuttle. And at this time, if you remember the conditions there in Florida, it was very unseasonably cold and causing, some distortions with the O-rings then. So you got all this together and, you had some engineers. And I remember reading about this one conference where an engineer came in there and said, I just don't think we should launch. And his boss said, take off your engineer cap and put on your manager cap. What do you think now? All right. So, that's part of these disasters here. Is this whole thing about, and I'll talk about in a little bit here about the de-individuation, just basically taking, making everyone just run in lockstep with everything. So we have the Sharp accident, as Dr. Reason, who's a very well-known guru on industrial accidents, happened. The O-ring burned through, Challenger solid rocket booster came off, and then we had the explosion. There you go. Columbia, we had enough of a foam strike in a very sensitive area, so when they were landing, superheated gases got into that area, caused one of the airplane tires to expand, and basically exploded the wing. So that's where the normalization of deviance comes through. And I know you were asking me, what can project managers learn from that?
Right.
So I would ask the project managers, take a moment, reflect. You don't have to tell us in person. You don't have to answer. How many times have you we missed that one. Thank God. Let's keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And just, okay, this is going to happen. That's okay. We can go on.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with a retired U.S. Army 4-star general. I was talking to him in the lunch line at an event, and we're talking about decision-making among executives. And I asked him, I said, what is the most common mistake or error that executives make around decision-making? And he said that executives, or people in general, I think, but we're talking about executives, don't make decisions that change the status quo, because they're afraid of change. And that feels like that connects to this, Bill, because, you're going along, and if you've got to stop, if you've got to bring attention to something, you've got to slow down the status quo. Now you're the person who's maybe the troublemaker, the squeaky wheel, whatever. And it feels like people naturally, I don't know, kind of avoid doing that.
Yeah. Or they start with the Columbia, they wanted to take photos of the underside of the Columbia in orbit and look at the damage there. And you got that fought. A lot of the engineers didn't, a lot of the engineers wanted to do that, but it was fought by the management because it's happened before. It's nothing to worry about. And you're going to cause some unnecessary panic or concern. And, how much of an issue is this really? And I can understand the status quo, because you think about this, you got your projects, you got all these different projects, you got to move on the project. And I don't think I've ever been in a project where they said, oh, you got all the time you need. You got to move fast, get to market and such. Can we just, move on and fix it later?
So what are some tools, and I don't know, Kate, how you've dealt with this, but how do we put the brakes on? I'm just a little project manager. I've got my tiny little project here, and this big CEO person is yelling at me, get it done. And I see yellow lights going on here. How can we handle that?
What I will say is, as we talk about this, the things I'm thinking about are, honestly, I have worked on projects where time wasn't the biggest concern. It wasn't about timing the market. But one thing would be, we don't have any more people or budget to give you. I don't got any more money. You can't have any more money. So I can't do anything else to do it. If you want to take pictures of the underside of the shuttle, that's going to be more money. We don't have that on this budget. I cannot go back and ask for another budget increase. Why can't they ask for a budget increase? Because of the second thing that comes up a lot, politics. There are stories and narratives around all of the work that we do at work, right? And on both sides of this, they wanted to have Reagan speaking about the Challenger shuttle, talk about education, so it's like, you're going to ruin this big educational day. It's a big moment for NASA. The irony of it being a big moment in history for the wrong reasons. We probably all know more about the Challenger because we lost it than it succeeded, which is wild. But, I don't want to keep the literal president of the country waiting. I don't want my job is on the line if this doesn't go well. There's a bunch of narratives that people are managing, and it's really easy to say it's happened before and we survived. So I think when we talk about these things, those are the two that are going through my mind. I don't have any more money, and I have a story around this project. I can't possibly change its narrative.
Kind of going back to your question, Kim, one of the things is you have to kind of build it into the culture. So one thing I learned when I was working in the Navy Inspector General's office, about carriers and all this stuff. And if a sailor finds a wrench or some tool out on the carrier deck, he can shut down the entire carrier. He can stop all launch operations and everything, because that's in the culture. And they actually award the person for doing that. Because, if you get a tool, and people don't realize there is very little pressure difference with jet engines. You get a tool coming into your turbine, you can cause the plane to crash. You can cause all kinds of disaster. So it's like, in some cultures, like the Toyota production system, you have that, is it the andon cord or whatever? You can pull the cord and say, hey, we need to stop for a moment. And you don't, and you have the psychological safety built in. So if someone does, and, it was okay, we were fine and everything, but you don't penalize them for it. So, it would start with the leadership. And it's like, we want to launch and all this, but do we want to put people in danger? Do we want to put the project in danger? And do we want to respect that? So that's one way of doing it.
You can always say, oh, the guy told me to think like a manager. And you can go as a PM and write in your raid log, okay, I tried to raise this and the guy ignored me. I talked to this guy at 12:42 p.m. And okay, fine, you've covered your butt, but that's not to keep the thing from blowing up.
He told me to put on my manager hat, and my manager hat said, I would like to get my bonus this year. So I said, fine, don't listen to me, person who was hired to do this job to point out problems, I guess.
Yeah. But, it's good to do that. So we have recorded of it. We've got some accountability we can refer back to, but that doesn't stop the Challenger from exploding or your project from exploding. And so now I guess it's what we start falling into crucial conversation territory. We say, hey, I got a real concern here, and start raising, I guess. And I don't think there is a good answer to this. There's a good way to do that, but I'm interested in exploring this from that PM who, I have been that PM where you're trying to call this out and everybody's saying, no, we got to keep up the momentum.
Oh, yeah. Well, the story about the guy that first talked about the Y2K issue back in the early 80s. They fired him, and every one of these projects I investigated, there was always some memo. I call it the super memo. Even in the 70s, they were talking about O-rings, and there was memos going back to that and the insulation. And oh my gosh, the A-2 bomber, which never took off, actually, never went anywhere, but it was like tons and tons of paperwork on it. And in there, buried in the files, was all the memos you wanted on why this wasn't going to work the way you thought it was.
Do you know what I think is so interesting? I just have to share this is because I ride horses, and there's a lot of horse safety that people can forget to do. Some of the things are like, you never want to wrap a lead rope. If you're not familiar with horses, they wear like a halter around their face whenever you walk them, and there's a rope attached to that. You never want to wrap that around any part of your body, because at any point the horse could spook, run away. And if it was wrapped around your fingers, it could break your fingers, it could break your hand. If it's wrapped around your leg, you could get drug, and you're going to get drug hard, because if the horse spooks, you're going to go 90 degrees different from standing on the ground very quickly. But, people, they get to know their horses. Your horse is better broke, more tame, and you break these rules because you know the animal. But there are still unpredictable things in life that could happen that could result in an accident where the horse spooks and then something bad happens. And so trainers have a culture of, where are you standing? Where is that wrapped? Where are your feet? Like they're always looking at these things. They're reinforcing that constantly. And I just got a new horse. She's a baby. And I have to be really careful about all my horse stuff because she doesn't know any better. And I have to be really diligent about it. In a couple of years, I won't have to be as diligent and I'll probably slide again. But there's a culture built into that. But when I'm by myself, there's no trainer. It's just me deciding to do what I do. And what I think is interesting is like some of these scenarios that you're talking about, like, in the military, on the boat, they could say there's a tool out there, right? Somebody could die from that in the same way that somebody could die from like not having horse safety, not practicing horse safety. But if I am, a software engineer and I'm like, if you push this code to production, I can do the crappy way of doing it. It will probably break. Nobody's going to die from that typically, depending on what it is you're working on.
Yeah.
You might lose money as a company, but most people can only see the opportunity to get money or get whatever their outcome is. So like, I'm so curious if there's a middle ground for, because like on a factory floor, people could die. You know what I'm saying? Like the stakes are so much higher. So what I think is interesting here is if since nobody's dying, is it fine to have projects that aren't having as strict safety standards?
Right.
Or is that something where it's worth the diligence to be like, anybody can stop production at any time, I think is sort of what I'm seeing.
Well, and I talked about Dr. Reason before, and he talks about the idea of the protection production curve.
Okay.
And a lot of companies, they have to balance the protection versus the production. Because if you put more protection in things, it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to cost a little bit more. And is it going to really, pay off? There's some marginal utility thing here. Okay. And then there's the production. We want to go faster with our stuff and produce more. So maybe we can skimp a little bit on the protection. And I remember this, like, for example, great example I got in school about, production and protection, where we can spend $1 million to build a knife that the minute it senses any kind of human flesh, it'll automatically stop, put down shields, whatever. You can't get cut by it. Mm-hmm. But are you willing to pay are you willing to pay $1 million for that knife? Or are you willing to just kind of maybe occasionally nip the end of your finger off, Mm-hmm. So it's how much we want to take there. Yeah.
Yeah. I can share one experience I had where I was working in a technology company, and there was a big project to implement a large piece of we'll call it IT infrastructure is what we'll call it. $1 million, $2 million project, something like this, a couple $1 million. And I was sent in because the project was way over budget. It was completely out of control. There were all these problems. The customer was upset. And I thought, wow, okay, yeah, I'll come in and see if I can help out. Turns out that the project had been purchased by one department, and another department said, no, that's my domain. I will take ownership of this project now. And so now they owned the project, but they had very different expectations on this fixed fee project. Said, no, we do our design documents this way. We do our approval of the rollout plan this way. And so after that initial change, the team was told, keep up the momentum. And so they kept trying to do the same things. Well, what about this design document? What about that design document? And they kind of almost normalized this idea that everything was going to be missed. And I went in and I saw that, and I tried to raise the bell and say, this O-ring ain't going to work. And I said, okay, you need to just give them a bunch of money and switch and as a concession and switch to time and materials, or you're going to lose an extra $1 million. But they didn't want to make the change. And I ended up having to walk from the project as a PM. The first time I've ever done that, I had to walk from the project because I couldn't be there and continue to do that and watch it fail. I was thinking, is there another way I could have handled that? Is there another technique I could have used?
I mean, thinking about this, and this gets in our second talk here about, thinking about how we help with the decision-making. Because I told you in my research, there's a guy, actual name, Dr. Nutt, N-U-T-T, who did lots of research on decision-making and basically found that half our decisions, more or less, are wrong or, aren't as successful as we want them to be. Now, you try telling that to some of the executives I worked with, because, you've heard the highest paid person in the room's opinion. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I had to do was actually teach these folks critical thinking and actually, hey, let's reflect on our thinking and let's see if our thinking is helping us out. And I've had some success in introducing the OODA loop, the Boyd cycle, the observe, orient, decide, and act. And this came about from a U.S. Air Force colonel, Colonel Boyd, who was really a scholar of warfare and a scholar of air combat and such. And he came up with this loop, which is deceptively simple, but there's a lot of richness in it. Okay. And this was the basis for maneuver warfare. And this is what helped win the Iraqi war back in 1991, because we were able to outmaneuver the Iraqis because we were able to make decisions faster and get into their decision making and loop through it faster than they could. So I love the OODA loop. I've used that a lot, and I have people think about their how they make decisions. And one thing I add to it is R, so reflection. So it's observe, orient, decide, and act, and then reflect. And I think it's where a lot of leaders, they make decisions, but have they actually sat back and reflected on it? And that's one thing, a little plug for you there, Kim, on your RAID log, is that's why I love that whole decision tab, because I'd love to mine the decision tab and say, okay, you made these decisions. What's your success rate on those? What were your past decisions like? Are we seeing a trend in how much better you're getting at your decision making? Because it's all around how you observe, what you observe in your environment, and how you orient yourself to what you're observing. And and people do this differently, because we can all look at the same thing and maybe focus on other stuff and make our decisions based on that. And there's all these cognitive traps. One of my favorite props, I used to use this in training, you can get this from Amazon, is a list of cognitive biases. And at the time, the chart was 178. It was just this huge circle, all these cognitive biases. And I said, when you look at this, how do we even make a decision? How do we even make a good decision? But these have all these cognitive biases. And what you need to do with the reflect here is, well, in this case here with the, let's say the O-ring burn through, right? What surprised us? We designed the O-rings to be this way. They're getting burn throughs. Instead of accepting that, what signals are we missing? What surprised us about that? And why are we letting this become normal when it shouldn't be? The normal thing is the O-ring is 100% integrity. There's no burn through. It's keeping itself together. So how do we get back to that? Okay.
That's really interesting, because when you look at a RAID log, you can tell which risks converted to an issue, right? Because it's a risk now is issue, but we don't have that same feedback loop normally in decisions. Oh, decisions were made, but were they good? Were they bad? I don't know. If I'm lucky, I took time to capture it. And this also kind of connects back to our conversation with Jim Johnson of the Standish Group. And when we talked to him about the number one cause of project failure, he said decision latency. And Kate, I'm going to ask you to correct me on this, but I think he said something to the effect, it's better to make a wrong decision if you're making fast decisions or something like that.
Yeah. My favorite thing that he said about decision latency was, like, too many leaders are getting stuck in analysis paralysis. And this is exactly what we're talking about, Bill, right? With the protection versus production curve, right? It's like, we don't want to make the wrong choice. We don't want to make the wrong. So you can do that. You can quote unquote protect through just not making a decision. But one of the things he said that I like, that I think reflects what you're saying here. Oh gosh, I used reflect. It's like a pun. But I've done it. Oh no. Is that his opinion is that it's not ready, aim, fire. He would say that it's ready, fire, aim. Mm-hmm. And because what you do is you get ready, you take a shot, and then you see how close you were to where you were, and then you ready, fire, aim again, right? That's the process that you go through. And to what you're talking about with adding this reflect loop, right? Like, you could do the same thing, right? When you get ready again, you're like, oh, what surprised me about where that particular shot landed on the target? And where do I, what was I ignoring? I literally went to a shooting range the other day and was like, does the target look off to you? And he was like, no, I don't see anything when I shoot. And I was like, okay, well, that wasn't helpful, man. Who knows how to shoot guns better than I do? Yep. But I'm like, if I ever go again, I'm going to wear my glasses and see if the target looks different to me. Because I was like, I see two targets whenever I do this, and I have an astigmatism. So that would be normal for me if I never checked on that. I'd be like, I guess you just see two targets. But I was like, am I supposed to see two targets? My eyes are funny. So I hear what you're saying on this.
Yeah. And you think about the complexity of decision making. So we have a project. In a typical day, how many decisions do you make about that project?
So many.
So many. And how many times does the effect of your decision come immediately, a little bit later, maybe a couple of days ago?
Sometimes it's months away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, one example from the Apollo program, Apollo 13,
Mm-hmm.
if you've seen the movie, you know what happened there. One of the oxygen tanks, there was faulty circuits and it caused an explosion with the oxygen tank. And if I remember correctly, they were talking about in the narration that this was a weld that was done 3 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, so we had to wait 3 years for it. Now, in my own Kentucky way, I have an example I call the White Castle effect. Are you all familiar with White Castle?
The restaurant?
Yeah, it's a little burger place. And I like White Castle. They're little burgers. They're kind of, they're steamed and all this kind of stuff. The thing about the White Castle effect is they're great going down. And then at 3 a.m, that's when they hit.
It's horrible.
And then I realized I made a bad decision.
Yeah. Yeah. The kids like to say, why did 7 p.m. me was really cruel to 3 a.m. me? Why did Tuesday me decide to have a Friday at 4 p.m. meeting? Curse Tuesday me for putting that 4 p.m. meeting on my calendar.
Exactly. Yeah. And part of that is that we make the decisions, and sometimes, if you have the RAID log, you can go back and look at them, but we're making so many in the midst of this, and it's, do we have time to go back and review those? And we should. And that helps a lot with the decision making. So with some executives to say, well, think about the models you use. Think about how you make decisions. Do you reflect on it? Are you trying to make the model better? Because sometimes they just learn one way.
Yeah. And so is that part of the key then to break the normalization of deviance by actually taking a look at it intentionally?
Reflection really helps you break that normalization of deviance, because you start saying, why am I accepting this? Why am I doing this? And why am I accepting these results? When can I make it better? And sometimes that's why I also suggested, using red teaming. If you can't do it, make someone show you up on it and show you where you're going wrong. So that's why I like to, in my projects, sometimes I'll red team them just so I can have, people delighting and show me where I was wrong. But it helps.
Talk about red teaming for those of us who are not familiar with the red team term.
Okay. Yeah, it comes from the military. I believe it's kind of the idea of that you have a military strategy or something. So you get some people on the other side that act like your opposition, and their whole purpose is to try to find the holes or the chinks in your armor or whatever. And, the Army uses this all the time. There was, they have these units where they're testing base security, or they're testing how well you can maneuver. And they'll have a team of folks that are really good at this. And in the hacking world, you've heard of white hat hackers and black hat and gray hackers. And I did a little bit for a while there, penetration testing, where my friend would set up something and I would try to break into their system and try to find the holes and weaknesses. And that's how I did behind red teaming. It's like, I made this great decision. Now I want to, find the kinks in it. And I think it might be Netflix. They have something called the Flying Monkeys of Chaos.
Yeah, chaos monkeys.
The actual term. Yeah, you've heard it. And what they do is they go through the server network, and before the hackers can get into it, they do it to themselves. And they'll do things like knock out half their disk, or they'll lose a critical power supply, and they'll have their team scramble to figure out what to do so they can handle that. And when I was doing a large conference, I do this in training. I was doing a large conference patent and trademark office, and I had volunteers, and we red teamed everything. What happened if our keynote speaker didn't show up? What if our network went down? What if we lost internet connectivity? What if we had some raging nut that got into our discussion board and, decided to, espouse their own personal philosophy about life? And I would simulate this with the volunteers. And I had one conference. Everything except the crazy raving nut getting into our discussion board did happen. We lost a keynote speaker. We lost our network. We lost our slides. And my team was like, oh, okay, I got this. I know what to do now. And we were able to kind of jump into it to the point that we had one, and I thought that was hilarious. We had our person who was speaking about emotional intelligence, and then she just had trouble with her technology, and she started falling apart, literally falling apart. The audience thought it was rehearsed.
Good for her.
But we were in the back behind the scenes there, just tap dancing as fast as we can, try to get things going. Yeah. One thing I learned from theater is don't let them see the mistakes up front. Just act like it's part of the stage show.
All right, red teaming. I like that. That's I hadn't heard that term.
One thing I'm taking away is that don't call it your risk meeting, call it your red team meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People will be much more excited to come to a red team meeting than to a risk meeting, and you can get the same outcomes. You could capture all your risks from a red team meeting instead of from a risk meeting.
It is.
And it's a great team building activity to have them play red team once in a while because they just love poking holes in things. And yeah, how much can I make your life worse?
Gosh, yeah. Because
it definitely attracts a certain type of personality. I worked in InfoSec for a while.
yeah, you say, hey, let's have a meeting to talk about risk, and there's nobody excited about that. But this could be fun. I'm gonna add this to my RAID log certification trainings, I think.
Call it red teaming?
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious to hear more about, Bill, that you mentioned earlier, was it de-individuation?
Yeah, de-individuation.
What is this?
Well, you've probably heard of, there's a scientist, Dr. Janis, who talked about groupthink. And, where they look at the classic examples like the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the whole idea that you get a group together and they just aren't going to challenge the authority and they all start thinking alike. And with de-individuation, I used another doctor, Dr. T. Hart, he was talking about the same stuff Janis was talking about, where people just essentially are just going to go with the flow. And the idea with individuation is that I'm on a team, I got an overbearing project manager, and I'm just tired of fighting anymore. I'm coming here, I'm getting my paycheck. I don't want to mess up my pension. I don't want to mess up my retirement. And I really don't care. And I know I'm starting to sound like I'm speaking from experience. Yes. I don't care. Whatever. If this ship blows up, I'm just going to make sure I'm getting off is my thing. So I've seen that with project teams before where it's just, they try to bring up things, they try to talk about things, they try to do reflection, and they just get, knocked down over and over.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a job recently where I just, every time, at one meeting, and I know I was going to be leaving soon anyway, one way or the other. And I just kind of said, so I came in the meeting and said, okay, I have some ideas ready for you to shoot down. So, and she got mad and said, I don't do that. And I was like, okay, you don't. Yeah, you don't. But that's what the de-individuation thing does. And what happens is people, they give up. So there's going to be the nice term for it is ethical drift. It's basically, I don't care. You can do whatever you want. I don't care if it's unethical or not, as long as I'm not going to be caught with it. Then it's also, we're doing normalization of deviance. Hey, well, the O-ring burned through this time, but you guys don't think it's serious, so I'm not going to worry about it either. And then we got, then people just, I'm checked out. I'm working on my resume. I mean, I'll give you an admission here on the podcast. There have been meetings where I've been working on my resume in the meeting. A lot easier when we had online meetings. And the thing is that, people aren't going to dissent. And the failures, we could not, people don't even feel they're preventable. It's just like, it's part of the system. We're just going to go with it. Okay. And that can be very dangerous because, everyone's just whatever you want.
Well, how do we undo that?
Well, again, the leaders have to jump in and do this, and they have to model this, okay? And they've got to go to people and repersonalize or basically say, it's okay to be accountable. And we want you to be accountable, and we're going to hold you accountable. And what we mean by that is that we're going to let you speak up. We're going to give you the psychological safety. And if you dissent from me, that's fine. I expect that. So one way, again, is like, okay, you know what? Everyone here is in agreement. So let's red team this. Show me what's worse about this, or show me how you would destroy this or something. So, we start giving people permission to dissent, okay? And you want to disrupt the roll-up absorption. So remember when I talked about that fellow that was like, take off your engineer hat, put on your manager hat?
Mm-hmm.
Right. In other words, don't give me the concerns that you were up with. Just imagine you're a manager. Now, what would you do? And you got to watch the roles, because sometimes we put roles in like, are you a team player? Oh, that's the worst one. Are you a team player?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And maybe I'm not, or maybe I am a team player by, bringing up stuff. I mean, I went to meeting. Oh my gosh. Now, thankfully I was out the door in about a month. So I was just enjoying the meeting, but we had this boss and she just was upset about stuff. And she's like, are you bringing your A game to work? And I mean, it was like a whole half hour of cliches, to the point I started texting these cliches to friends of mine. Oh, you won't believe what she just said now. But that's the thing. Yeah. The leader they just don't listen to themselves on it. And here's the one that's going to be really controversial. When your stakes are really high, when, there's life or death in there, slow the system down, slow the decision-making down, and make sure that reflection is non-optional. we're not just going to reflect if we want to. We're going to make sure reflection's built into it. So it's like with Agile or Scrum, where we have the retrospectives and you have to show up and you have to contribute. Yes, do that. And be the leader that calls them like, is that a real reflection or are you just trying to pass time? What do you really think?
One of the things that I was struck by when you talked about the wrench on the field, calling a flag on the play for a wrench on the field, is how when somebody identifies that, they are rewarded for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's so interesting here is how challenging it is to reward folks for these type of personalized accountability and raising these things, because they are often seen as, right? I mean, we don't want to lose. Kim, what don't we want to lose on this project? What's the word?
We don't want to lose momentum.
Right. And so if we want to slow the system when stakes are high, if we want to say, hey, you hired me to make sure this goes off well, and then I say, we got to slow down for a second, it's so interesting. It is it feels like a catch-22, I think, especially in tech. It might not be true in all industries, but I do think tech has been really wild lately because momentum is so important in tech. They want to get things out the door and they need to learn, right? Fail fast, right? They can't wait to fail, but also they don't want to fail. It's a very fun, silly, double-edged sword there.
And it's funny when they use fail too. It's like, well, there's failure you learn from and there's failure you're just being an idiot at.
So true.
And I've been in the tech world. Yeah. It's like, there's just some, you just took there's something, we're trying something. What can we learn from this versus, we're just going to do something silly.
Yeah.
And I can tell you as a project manager too, one thing that hits me is, it's hard to do this environment where I'm rewarding people for showing me up is I don't want to lose only momentum. I don't want to lose face because, I'm pretty happy about how I make decisions and I'm pretty happy about my ego. And it's like, someone in the meeting points out, oh, yeah, if you did that, you would be wrong. And it takes a lot of your own kind of self-courage there to say, yeah, and I'm going to look at this objectively, and I'm going to, because you want to do it for the best of the project. But, ego gets tied up in it sometimes. And I think that's with leaders.
Yeah. I mean, what happens for me is I'll be like, I have the world's best plan. And then somebody will bravely be like, we could do it this way. And I'm like, wow, there are more than one way to do this plan. Who would have thought there could be more than one good idea is how I soothe my own ego when that shows up. Because there's a reason why you ask for feedback, right? And I would rather get the right answer out of this than, having to, eat crow later because I'm right. There's actually no better way to do this. And, I have had the fortune of not having to work on projects where people could die, so my work has never been that serious where it's, whereas I think, I would act and behave as a leader really differently if lives depended on exactly what we did, if it goes wrong, the way that I'm militant with people learning about how to be safe with horse, very different than you have to use a raid log. You have to do these things because most people aren't going to die from those things.
No, I mean, when you talked about being on the firing range, just this last summer, first time ever in my life, fired a gun. Mm-hmm. And I really respected the rules of the range because when you're holding a rifle and shotgun, it's just, oh my God, this power in this thing. And it's like, I was Mr. Okay, I'm going to do everything and I'm not going to dissent.
Yeah.
Because I could see the ramifications. Oh, and one thing just recently came up. I was talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about AI and, using it for brainstorming. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest also with your leaders and project teams, be kind of careful of AI in the sense that they're very sycophonic. I don't think I've ever told ChatGPT a bad idea. I mean, it's funny. I'll suggest something. So that's great. That's a wonderful idea. It's like, really?
People like to hear that their ideas are good. It's one of their favorite things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, where is that accountability? So a friend of mine, he actually wrote some Claude code, one of his projects, where it does challenge him on his ideas. And he's gotten better results because of that. So, yeah.
Probably get some kind of a red team prompt in there and have it come after you.
Oh, that'd be great.
I do get better answers out of it whenever I tell it what I want to achieve rather than to do something specifically. Like, I'm looking to try to do this. What are some options for that? It's much more objective than like, I think my plan is great. Write me the project plan. It doesn't, then it thinks I've never done anything better in my entire life.
Now, Bill, we on our little show, we have a reflection tool that we like to use, and it's called You Might Be in Trouble If.
Oh, yeah.
And we put together some statements. We try to recap and rethink about what we covered. And, wonder if you can help us with some You Might Be in Trouble If statements for our audience.
Okay. Well, the first one I was thinking about here, and this goes right with the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, you're not reflecting.
Yeah.
And I've been with some folks that are all about action. We make a decision, we're acting. We make a decision, we're acting. And it's like, you need to reflect a bit. You need to stop for a moment and see the effects of your action. I mean, a great example I like to use for my friends in martial arts is like Bruce Lee. You ever seen Bruce Lee fight?
Oh, yeah.
Flurry of action, right? Then he pauses and looks at what happened. And then he starts again. So there is very quickly, you can reflect very quickly, but you still are reflecting on what have you done. So if you're acting and your project manager's acting and acting, we're making decisions and acting, and there's not enough reflection, what's going on? Are we, because I've done that before where I've been in something and I think I'm going in the right direction and I'm not, because I didn't take a chance to look around and see things, right? And observe what my actions were. And then kind of on that same thing is, what is the optimum ratio of acting and reflecting in your decisions and in your projects? Because how complex is your project? And I'm going to just throw this out here, see what you guys think. I think the more complex your project, the more reflections you should bring in. Because the complexity of your project, you got complexity of decisions and all that stuff, and you got some of the decision latency. You need to take some time and see, okay, how are the decisions working out? How are my effects working out? And do I have the right mix of acting and reflecting? Am I reflecting too much? Am I not acting enough? It's kind of like look at that and adjust.
Yeah, there's something in there about the stake of the decision as well as for the frequency or, intensity with which you review.
And then last two here, I love mental models. I studied those. It was a part of my dissertation. And, one of the things I have with folks, and mental models got a real resurgence here a while back. Amazon had all kinds of books, all these mental models on how to make decisions. And one of the things is what kind of mental model are you using in your decisions? All right. So, what have you updated it? Has things changed? And I'll give you an example I saw last night. I don't know if you ever watched Scrubs. So I was watching Scrubs, about the doctors. Mm-hmm. And they had Dick Van Dyke, basically on there, kind of, playing a friendly doctor. And the problem with him was that he was an old school doctor who had not updated his techniques. And he was becoming dangerous to the patients because he had ways of doing things, but these were like 20, 30 years ago, and things had changed, new techniques and such. And sometimes I see that with project managers and I see that with executives where they had this old reliable mental model they used to make decisions, and they haven't changed with the times, and they don't really review that. And then here's one I always think is kind of funny. What does your team have mental models? They can actually build a mental model together. And there's a team mental model. So do they have mental models behind their decisions? Have they reviewed them? How do they come together as a team to make decisions?
Most of the time it's just made up as they go, right?
Yeah, exactly. But, you should be learning too. And after a while, when you learn things, you get these rules of thumbs, heuristics, all those kind of things. Yeah. But just taking the time to think about how you're making the decisions rather than just making a decision. Yeah. Otherwise, you end up eating White Castle at 11 o'clock at night, and you really shouldn't have done that.
Really holding the mirror up to yourself and your decisions and your team, then is what it comes down to. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this is a you might be in trouble if, but one of the things I really am taking away is I think there's a lot of value in calling anything risk related red teaming.
Yes.
I think it's hard to get folks to want to talk about risk. It's really challenging. I just talked with one of our members about it recently. But you know what? Engineers, God, they love problems. They love being the smartest person in the room. They love love poking holes in things. A great way to pull them together would be like, we're going to have some fun. And you could even make it competitive for them. Like whoever can break the plan, and these are silly things, right? But like gets the pizza party, gets the first slice of cake. I don't care, right? If you're doing it in an office together, gets to wear the crown for the next week. But I think there's a lot to this red teaming approach to managing decisions and risk like this. I really think if you're not using some fun lingo to identify problems, you you might be in trouble.
And speaking of awards, I remember when I was working at the Office of Personnel Management, I was in payroll and leave, and we used to have this award. It was kind of an informal award. It was a stuffed pickle. And basically, we awarded it to someone that made the biggest mistake that week. And it was kind of fun because what did you learn from it? Because, we had to make sure we learned from it and stuff. But yeah, there was kind of interesting. I got the pickle award a couple of times. First time I was mad. Second time I realized the value of it. But, yeah. But it kind of took the sting out of it a bit. And, we all learned a lesson from it because you had to give a speech on what did you learn?
Yeah, add a little fun.
Making it positive. Well, Bill, thanks so much for joining us. And this is only the tip of the iceberg of all the cool things that you've done. So if our audience wants to connect with you or learn more about the cool stuff you've done, how would they do that? Where do they go?
The best place to go on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn newsletter on state and local government training and other topics I talk about. So that's my big place. And then I think I gave you the links here. There's a portfolio of articles and presentations. It's on something called Authory. Authory, and I keep that updated, so new magazine articles and everything. I've written 4 books. Fourth one came out, The Zen of Machiavelli. That was kind of fun. But my favorite one was The Persuasive Project Manager. That was my first book, and I'm working on a second edition. And that's where I learned about failure because I had originally written it as an academic article, and after being turned down by 31 academic article magazines, I just said, I'm going to write a book because I'm so mad at you folks. And then it turned into a course, and they teach it at University of Maryland now, so that was great. But yeah, sometimes you can learn from failure and good stuff.
Right. Well, awesome. We'll have all those links in our show notes so our audience can check it out.
And as we close out for today, it's time to get the next round. I'd love for you to give us our virtual toast.
Okay. So this is kind of what I was talking about. So the idea here is to keep your eyes and mind open while you're riding the UDAR loop, the observe, orient, decide, act, and reflect loop. So just as you're riding that loop, keep your eyes open, keep your mind open.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And that's our show. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show, please leave a review and a comment on iTunes or wherever you get our podcast. Your review really does mean a lot. And if you want to check out our membership site and all of our cool content there, you can check that out at pmhappyhour.com/membership. If you want to talk to us directly about project management, PM consulting, training, or whatever, our contact info is on our website under About Your Hosts, or you can just hit us up on our Facebook site at PM Happy Hour. You'll find we're really pretty easy to get a hold of there. And that's it for today. Good luck with your projects, and we hope to catch you again at the next PM Happy Hour. Cheers.